Yo guys, welcome to the Zelda fiction. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto becomes the greater ninja assassin? Part 1. Huge shout out to AmniIsRoving for this story. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Aburame Shino watched a blonde in interest as he spaced out once more. He didn't really stand out that much, his small form hunched next to a bed of weedy flowers. The blonde sat stilly as he watched a butterfly flutter gently between the different blooms before tentatively holding a finger out, his face serious. Shino watched in amazement as the bug landed on the boy's finger and the formerly somber face broke out in a wide encompassing grin. It painfully reminded him of his former adoptive brother Torin, the slightly older boy having left Shino to join Rude in his place. Maybe it was this familiarity that led him to forge one of the strongest bonds of his life with one of the truly best people he'd ever know, especially after watching Naruto's simple act of kindness, something that the Aburame heir approved of mightily. It was this friendship that dramatically altered the life of Konohagakure's greatest reject and hero, as well as saved the greatest failure of the Yondaime Hokage's short fatherhood, Uzumaki Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto was a very quiet boy due to years of heavy reprimand from the orphanage matron and other villagers, whether he was good or bad. While he didn't understand why he was treated so, he suspected there was something about him that people just didn't like. There were some that just avoided him on principle, but did that with all children under a certain age, and others who avoided him while glaring from a distance. Most children were dragged away from the blonde by their parents or encouraged to pick on him, though he couldn't guess the reason, having never talked to them or hurt them in any way. It, however, seeded a bit of rebelliousness and resentment in him. The only real things that didn't seem to be bothered by him were bugs. He found spiders to be particularly interesting with their webs. Gently shooing the butterfly off, he watched it flutter around, eventually being joined by a few of its fellows, before looking down at the beetles and other crawling insects with interest. The ants caught his eye, and he followed their tidy little line back to a small mound. Studying it for a moment, he almost missed the sudden charge of another boy playing tag towards the mound. Throwing himself carefully over the little pile of dirt allowed the boy to slam into him and fall over away from the anthill, saving it. Ouch. The boy said, his blue-black hair falling over his face. What was that for? He shouted at the blonde as he merely glared at him silently. He blinked in surprise, however, when a shadow of another person appeared between them. Why? The shadow's voice cut in, because you were about to hit an ant mound. Thus you were about to kill them. He then decided that his hurt was less than the loss of the mound and the lives of innocent insects you were about to hurt. Naruto glanced up at his surprising defendant and recognized a boy from his school, and more specifically in his class, Aburame or something like that, the only boy quieter than him. The offended boy huffed and merely got up and left. Naruto leaned back and carefully backed away from the mound, making sure not to interfere with the little line of ants as they headed back to the small hole. Thanks, Naruto said awkwardly after a few minutes of awkward silence, neither used to talking or interacting with others their age. Both were very used to silence, one out of general necessity and disposition, the other due to enforced training from rather belligerent caretakers. No thanks needed. The boy said monotonously. Naruto beat his head to the side to study the other boy. He wore a loose long-sleeve, dark gray shirt, the sleeve hems could be seen under his jacket, and black pants with similar colored sandals. He had dark brown hair that stuck up a bit, though not as spiky as Naruto's, and was covered by the hood of the tan jacket he wore. The boy stared at him behind black, oval-shaped lenses, and Naruto, curious and unashamed, stared back. Uzumaki Naruto, he offered, giving the taller boy his hand. Aburame Shino, he replied, taking it and shaking it firmly. Want to join me in finding beetles? Naruto asked, a bright grin forming on his face when the other boy nodded. The other boy helped him up and led him into the grass, naming the bugs they found with precision. Feeling a spot in his chest squeeze, Naruto wondered if this was what having friends was like. Aburame Shibi wasn't exactly sure how his son and heir became friends with the social outcast and universally, at least in most of Konoha, despised Jinchuriki, but he was pleasantly surprised nonetheless. The blonde, unlike his mother, although he had her stamina and energy, was rather quiet, if a bit spacey at times. He was a bit shy as well and unused to adults, as well as skittish around them. That part of his personality worried him and his wife, though they never brought it up with either of the children giving them positive attention. Like a feral cat, Naruto had slowly come to accept them and even allowed his wife to hug him on the odd occasion now. Currently, the boy was with Shino looking over the first of Shino's many insect colonies. While members of the Aburame clan were immediately given to the Kakashi upon birth, extra insects were kept either as a backup if a colony was killed off partially or totally, and for specific breeding and strengthening purposes. Stepping into the doorway, he watched for a moment, observing as Naruto handed his son a requested item and joined him in watching the bugs in their special mounds. After a year of bonding, the two was nigh inseparable and regularly sought out the other when they were parted for more than an hour. For a man who hadn't made close ties until his genin teammates, it pleased the Aburame head enormously, even more than others could have possibly known or suspected. After the loss of Torun to Danzo, he still had to repay the bastard somehow. Both he and his wife were relieved Shino was making friends. "Dinner?" Shibi said, gaining their attention. The blonde blinked in surprise and offered a slight bow of thanks before following his friend out the door. The clan head watched the blonde and felt a bit of pity well up. The son of their fourth Hokage looked more like a street rat than a well-cared-for orphan. Just what were those orphanage attendants doing? He followed, however, and joined them in the family dining room. His wife came in carrying food and smiled at the blonde who offered to take them from her. Shino asked if it was fine for Naruto to stay the night and she glanced at him in question, earning a nod of approval before she looked at Naruto, who'd been shooed into a spot next to Shino. "He won't be missed?" Shibi's wife, Saki, asked as she set a plate before him. The blonde shook his head. "I don't live at the orphanage anymore and there's no one at home to mind. My apartment only has me after all." The adults blinked before turning to glance at each in silent communication. They were both a bit stunned. A 6-year-old living alone. How? Why? Shino seemed surprised by this tidbit as well and stared at his friend. "When?" he asked bluntly. "Yesterday," Naruto answered easily as the adults' gazes passed back and forth between them narrowly. "The first day of school," Shibi thought. "That's why you were not able to play after class?" Shino reasoned, forehead wrinkling. "Yes." Naruto glanced at both of the adults as they stared at him in a funny manner before scrunching down and shifting closer to Shino in an attempt for comfort. Shibi's son noticed and glanced at his parents as well before shuffling a bit closer in a silent bid to put him at ease. "How are you paying?" Shibi asked abruptly. His wife's gaze was trained on the orphan in a growing mix of disbelief and horror. "Hokage Aisama has a fund that he pays out to me around the middle of the month," was the quiet reply, and Shibi felt the uncharacteristic need to curse. "Ah. What are you doing for food?" Saki asked as she took her place after dragging Shibi down next to her, her mind a whirl. As a housewife and mother she felt morally and emotionally offended by what she was learning. "Uchiha and Amni," Naruto replied. "You can't eat ramen every meal of your life," Shino said sternly. Both parents felt a moment of humor lighten their growing dismay and anger. The ramen debate between the pair was rather infamous amongst the household and Aburame clan. Shino was determined to get his friend to expand his horizons, and Naruto just wanted to eat his favorite food in peace. The argument was currently on hold since Shino didn't want all of his sunglasses stolen and hidden again. "I don't, sometimes I eat onigiri," the boy defended. The trio felt a bit of momentary disbelief, and Shino resisted the urge to groan. "That would be unseemly." "That's not healthy," Saki said. "What are you doing for groceries?" She could help fix him some simple meals and teach him some easier sides to make if he was determined to live on his own, but the next answer stopped her cold. "Nothing really, the market isn't open to me." "Why?" Shibi asked, his hand closing tightly around his chopsticks. "They're jerks." The bug users all blinked, stared at Naruto to confirm who said it, and blinked again. Naruto, who never said anything bad about anyone unless it was unavoidable, had said an insult, even as mild it was, as bluntly as any Aburame. The boy was painfully polite and proper in his usual conversation, never even thinking of offending someone with a negative comment, and even most of his sentences ending in desu. To do so was paramount to stating the person or group of people were dirt beneath his feet and deserved to die a grisly end. "Ah." Shibi said, smoothing his hand flat out and letting his angry tense muscles forcibly relax. "Care to give me a description?" Looking into the sky blue eyes, Shibi knew he wasn't going to like what the small blonde said next. He didn't. Naruto had the best friend in the world. But the academy still sucked majorly. Nothing could make it better, not even ramen, and that was saying a lot. This was their second year and it wasn't getting any better, and if the trend continued it would just get worse, a thought that made Naruto grimace mildly. So while Shino was able to help him and both of the boys' parents were great, the instructors hated him and were determined to ruin his life and education. Already he was struggling to keep from being placed at the bottom, and Shino and he both knew it wasn't their fault. The same homework and answers that they would both submit would earn a nearly perfect grade for Shino, but would be marked all over in red for Naruto. More so, he was constantly harassed by the other children who seemed to decide that hanging out with a bug user made him a weirdo like their parents told them he was. Shino had been quite offended by that and Naruto even more so. Currently the duo were sitting at the back of the class, with the rest of the slackers or good-for-nothings, never mind that all of them, with the exception of Naruto, who was actually one and didn't know it, were to be the next clan head or the closest thing shinobi got to nobility. All of them, in Naruto's soft and almost never mentioned opinion, were nicer and better than the other riffraff that plagued them while at school. In a class of around 30 children, only 8 were from shinobi clans, while another 2 were from active shinobi families. The other 20 or so students, however, were civilian born. That made life hellish, no doubt. All of the civilian kids seemed to take their parents' teachings to heart and were fully backed by the teachers. During spars they would do dirty things to Naruto, pulling illegal moves or not listening to the teacher when they ordered them to stop, and never, not once, did they ever get reprimanded afterward. More than one fellow student, if they were civilian born that is, had blamed Naruto for something when he wasn't even in the room, and the blonde would get in trouble for it. This meant subtle payback. Thus, more than one teacher and student had run afoul with something rather mildly annoying or irritating. One girl's lunch got covered in ants regularly, however they blamed it on her cubby being so close to the window. While other bullies suffered mild pranks with itching powder, paint, and even chalkboard erasers, nothing overt of course, but common and general enough that the victims were only angry for a few moments. After all, everyone got pranked sometimes. If they were intelligent, however, they would have realized that neither Shino nor Naruto ever got pranked and the clan heirs and members much less in comparison to them. Nobody ever said they were intelligent, however. The teachers were a problem as well, but they suffered carefully planned setbacks as well. The meaner teachers would lose their wallets or passes to different government or shinobi things and have to hunt them down, only to find them later in a different pocket or somewhere in their desks where they knew they'd looked before. These cases, however, were something neither Shino nor Naruto ever got caught doing and served as practice in their stealth and trap abilities. The only teacher who didn't get hit by this was Umino Ruka, who sometimes actively assisted them in their payback, once a prankster always a prankster and all that. It didn't make life easier, but it kept them both sane. The recess and lunch bell rang and Naruto glanced at Shino in question and earned a subtle nod. Both 7-year-olds unearthed the lunches Shino's mom packed for them and headed for the small grassy clearing near the training area at the back, quickly leaving the classroom through the back door as they were dismissed. Heading to their favorite spot, both boys took their usual seats in the cool shade and relaxed. "I hate it here," Naruto finally sighed after a few minutes. "If it wasn't required of a ninja to pass the academy I would try a different way." Shino grimaced behind his new high neck jacket and nodded in understanding. He hated it as well. He couldn't believe his best friend was being hurt in such a manner. After learning Naruto was living alone and what the villagers were doing to him at the market and at his apartment, barely a day and he was already being tortured by the building manager. His parents had pretty much forced him to live with them. Naruto now rented a small 2-bedroom guest house near Shino's house in the Aburame compound and paid for his meals from sake. "Just 5 more years," Shino said, trying to be comforting. "It's almost 4 actually. We are halfway through this year." Naruto nodded and dug into his rice, quietly eating the food with a soft smile. Sake had made his second favorite food, beef and mushroom stir-fry, and he was grateful. Class this morning had been dreadful with all the taijutsu they were practicing, and this afternoon would get no better, what with shuriken and kunai lessons. Shino, catching the growing depression, quickly diverted his best friend's attention. "Have you found a style you like yet?" Shino asked, referencing the different scrolls and styles of fighting Naruto had been studying over the past few months. After realizing that the boy wasn't going to learn anything effectively or correctly at the academy, they were being trained back at home in chakra control, stamina, and some basic forms of all jutsu. Furthermore, his mother had taken him under her wing even more, leading Shino to suspect that they'd have another assassin in the Aburame clan. Naruto was an unofficial member and pretty much his brother, so he had to be an Aburame secretly, was Shino's train of thought. So while Shino and most of his clan didn't use taijutsu extensively, they did collect and hoard scrolls containing all sorts of bug-related jutsu and allowed Naruto to go through them to assist in his own learning and development. "I was thinking since the clan is more into spying, I'd handle trapping and combat. Ways to protect you or someone similar if we needed it," Naruto answered. "I have the strength and dexterity to handle wire, and Shibi Aji-san said I have a budding talent with Fuinjutsu. That means plenty of different tags and storage for use." Shino nodded. "You would do well," Shino said before he returned to eating. Naruto smiled at him in pleasure. "Thanks, Shino." "Ouch," Naruto muttered as his finger cut on the more advanced and sharper ninja wire he was acquiring. Now at the age of 11, he'd been training with the sharp threads for nearly 4 years. His insane healing quickly fixed it, and he picked out the next few rolls of spools he needed and some senbon and a new Fukiya-1. Shino was a few aisles away picking out some kunai. He glanced up at Naruto and beeped a brow as his best friend moved closer. Nearly 6 years of being best friends with an Aburame had changed the blonde forever. He was still short but growing, his chakra preventing the early malnutrition from affecting his body too much and totally protecting his learning and thought capabilities. The blonde boy was slender in an almost feminine manner, his spiky hair grown long and carefully braided and then pinned up before being effectively covered by a black bandana. His blue eyes were soft and fond when they rested on his best friend or anyone in the Aburame clan, and he dressed in a similar fashion to all the Aburame, but without the high collar. Instead, he substituted it for a face mask that covered his nose and distinct whisker marks, no doubt to help protect his sense of smell, which was comparable to an Inuzuka's, even though it also hid his identity. Shino also knew Naruto wore a mesh long-sleeve shirt of black over a sleeveless black muscle shirt, though neither could be seen under the thigh-length dark gray jacket with black trim on the pockets and hems, and a dark red Uzumaki swirl decorating the back and where the shoulders met each sleeve. His legs were covered in pants that had a number of pockets and were wrapped down from the calf to his ankle in dark gray tape before he pulled on a similar pair of black nin sandals as Shino's. In the end, Naruto was pretty much looked and dressed as a shadow. Good? Naruto asked as he held out the basket and Shino placed his own selection in. Good. Naruto nodded and they carried it to the counter. Shino pulled out their joint wallet and Naruto put the basket down. Both stared at the cashier silently as he rang up the items, Naruto musing at the benefit of hiding his identity from the general populace. No more being jilted at the register with increased pricing. Though he changed his getup to better suit his fighting style and training, he wasn't an overt offensive fighter, though he excelled at taijutsu, his specialty being covert operations. He appreciated the secrecy now afforded him. A few moments later, he was knocked out of his thoughts when Shino paid the man and took one of the 3 bags. Naruto grabbed the others, since they were primarily his purchases, and they left the shop at a relaxed gait, ignoring how the civilians and fellow shinobi edged away from when they realized Shino was an Aburame. What do you think about the final exam coming up? We have the chance to take it. Naruto asked since you were able to take the genin test when you turned 11 and or entered your second to last year of academy. When that happened you had the option to testing out early. If you decided to wait you could take it beginning of the following year, and if you decided to wait further you could take it at the very end of your schooling, and if you failed less than 3 times you were submitted to a retake until you hit 3 fails. You had 3 different chances to take the exam and could take it only 3 times. If you failed one you were not able to take the test again for a whole month if it was the first 2, if you failed all 3 chances you were forced to become a civilian. Some students took it only once and passed ahead of everyone else, while others tried and failed all 3 attempts. I would prefer to wait, Shino admitted, if only to get an idea of the level of difficulty and prepare ahead of time. Naruto nodded. We will do well though. We are too good to have a problem. Naruto said firmly in a rare show of confidence for his eyes crinkled in a clear smile. Shino's eyebrow twitched in humor and he nodded. Of course. Naruto took a deep breath as he slowly relaxed into his next stance. His hands moving through the different sharp angles with pure concentration and dedication, dancing through the katas under the watchful eyes of one of the best taijutsu masters the Aburame clan had. Finishing through his final movements the woman's lips quirked in pleasure. Good, she said congratulating him. Naruto straightened out of his stance and bowed to his teacher flushing in pleasure. Thank you Aburame-sensei, he said. The woman smiled at him and ruffled his hair, a rare sign of affection for the normally stoic Aburame. Then again she married into the family after catching the eye of one of their members, so she got away with it. Ma, you've come far, Naru-chan, she said teasing gently as she handed him a towel. The blonde relaxed further and gave her a bright smile. Thank you, Sakiaba-san, he said wiping his face. I am glad you approve. Your HOJOJUTSU2 has gotten better as well, she said motioning him to seat as she took her own place. Naruto smiled shyly and settled in front of her. Your skill with your wires is something to be envied, and your training with Kumo no Kobushi3 is becoming quite advanced. Naruto turned an even bright red. To hear that from the infamous JORMGUMO4 is an honor, Naruto said with a bow. Saki laughed in pleasure at her former bingo book label. I am sure you'll be even better, little spider. She said warmly at the boy she considered her second son. Now, I have a gift for you, she stated, pulling out a small bag from where it was tucked secretly inside her obi. Naruto accepted it with a bow and opened it curiously. His eyes widened and he glanced up at her in shock, surprise, and gratitude. A series of deceptively simple silver, clear heavy glass, and black iron rings lay in his palm. If it was for the sharp spikes and hooks on the bottom they could have been considered regular rings, perhaps even the ones poor peasants bought and wore once they were wed. Hey KUT-5? Naruto asked. They were a useful weapon for fighters like him, however quite rare for anyone who wasn't a kunoichi in the seduction or assassination corps. The ones handed to him were clearly made of high quality and expensive metal, in the case of the silver and iron ones, not to mention the glass, something the orphan had never thought to own until he was well into jounin ranks. Already his mind was whirling to the poisons he could learn and further equip the weapons with. He'd have to start a series of his mind whirled in excitement. Saki smiled as she took in his excited and overjoyed expression. He hid his expression as well as any Aburame, she thought with an amused mental snort. They were mine, she admitted and shook her head when he made to hand them back, obviously thinking she was merely showing them to him as a demonstration. They're yours now, Naru-chan, my gift and hope to ensure your success and survival. They were my mother's and someday they may be your child's or disciples. I know you'll use them well. She slipped one onto his finger and watched him adjust to the weight. This is a sign of your advancement. I'm sure you'll do well, little spider. She smiled in approval when he slipped a few on and tested them out, getting used to how they weighed so one day they could be of assistance. Naruto's face could have blinded any Aburame the next few months, his smile was so bright and happy. Shino more than once shook his head as his best friend trapped and wrapped up more than one unsuspecting Aburame in practice, his ropes and ties growing in intricacy. Even his father didn't escape the chaos, and the Aburame heir had laughed in a rare show of verbal amusement when he saw his father's put-out expression as his best friend happily hummed while looping slim hemp ropes in a diamond pattern around the captured shinobi's chest. Now, however, he observed his best friend building one of his more intricate and secret webs. Naruto, Shino said mildly as he stood on the porch watching his friend delicately make an encirclement of wires around a group of wooden and straw people. The blonde merely held up a single finger and twitched forward 3 times in an unspoken request of silence for a specific amount of time. A minute and 30 seconds later the blonde raced up a thick tree before dropping down on the opposite side, yanking his hands back as he landed onto the ground skidding back in a defensible position. The wires carefully stretched and placed, instantly pulled collapsing in from different directions. Their instant retraction sliced through the enemies disposing of them with a vicious precision that made Shino's eyebrow shoot up in acknowledgement and surprise. Every single cut alone would have been fatal, and if there had been blood, the liquid would have coated the woody arena. Golden web. Bloody encirclement, Naruto murmured and quickly gathered his spools of wire. Impressive, Shino commented, dinner is about to start now. Naruto smiled and followed silently, the wire returning to their places and the rings freed from their work. Sitting down to eat they murmured the traditional saying and quickly dove in, the food served out easily, and the bowls of rice and soup were filled often. The test is tomorrow, Shibi said finally. Both boys had decided to wait until the third test and anticipated passing easily. While neither boy was at the top or the bottom, they had followed the plan and stuck to the middle. It had frustrated the worse and meaner teachers immensely that the blonde had done so well and suited Shino's needs to stay with his best friend and properly assess their competition and future colleagues. Yes, Naruto said politely handing the beef dish around. We will pass. Shino commented. Why? Because we have all the skills we need and those that the teacher doesn't know of. Both Aburame adults smiled slightly at them. I don't doubt you will. You have the main 3 down? Saki asked. Substitution, clone, and henge, Naruto said with a wry grin. I am appreciative to all your care towards teaching me control, otherwise I'd never be able to use such a weak jutsu without overpowering it, Aburame-sensei. Shibi nodded and Saki smiled at the compliment. If you pass you'll each be taught a new jutsu. A special clan one for Shino and Kage Bushin no Jutsu for Naruto-kun, Shibi said with a slight smile as both boys' attention instantly intensified. Naruto was blinking at him owlishly and Shino's Kakechu buzzed in excitement. Both boys exchanged a glance and a particularly evil look crossed over Naruto's reminding the adults why he was the unspoken king of pranks in Konoha. Sometime soon it shall be interesting, Shibi thought with a slight smirk. Why? Because the teachers will surely suffer some humiliating encounter, but it is no less than they deserve. Why? Because they spent 7 years trying to crush my boys and tomorrow they will prove they are far better than anyone anticipated. The pranks that come after will be mere sauce on this dango. Content in his knowledge, Shibi ignored Naruto as he politely excused himself to make his final preparations, Shino joining moments afterward. Smirk growing into a look just as evil as Naruto's. Shibi silently wondered if they would hear the screams all the way in the compound. It would be good if they did. Imi no Iruka glanced up and ignored all of Mizuki's ill-tempered muttering as the Aburame boy finished his test. The insect clone had been impressive, as well as his henge into the Hokage, making it easy for Iruka to pass him. Shuffling his papers around the scarred Chunin felt his lips twitch a bit in humor as he read the next name. Uzumaki Naruto, eh? The blonde had been the silent pranking king for the past 6 years. While few of the teachers and students in the school had suffered from very few big-ticket pranks, the bullies of Naruto's year had been victim to more than a few mild but highly irritating ones. Nothing less than they deserved in his opinion, completely unbiased surprisingly. When Naruto and Shino had entered his class for their final year he'd seen how dedicated and hardworking the boys were, something that had belied earlier write-ups. In actuality, Naruto and Shino could probably match, and quite easily surpass if they wanted to, the current Rookie of the Year. In his own personal opinion, the duo belonged on a team together because while they were efficient alone, they were devastating standing together against a common force or enemy. Remembering how often one of the worst and bigoted girls in the class suffered from continued hijinks with all sorts of irritating insects, "Maybe it's your perfume," he'd offered mildly when queried why bees kept chasing her. Haruka muffled a snicker. Calling out the name, Haruka smiled mildly at Naruto as he took his place before them. "You've done well on the taijutsu and written portions of the exam," Haruka said firmly, squashing any bias down. "When you're ready, please transform into one of the proctors, swap with something in the room, and then form 3 clones." Naruto nodded and quietly gathered himself. A quick series of hand signals later and soft poof of smoke, and Haruka stared at a perfect copy of himself, clipboard and all. His copy smiled gently at him before rubbing his scar in embarrassment. The instructor paused in the middle of doing it himself and laughed. "Good," Haruka said, marking off on the test. Another soft pop and the boy changed back to his original shape. He flipped through a series of seals, and a plant stood in his place as he took the potted tree's place in the corner. Haruka fought the need to crow in joy and calmly said, "Bushin' now." Another series of quick hand seals and 3 other Narutos stood there with a slight smirk appearing on their faces. Glancing at the infuriated look on Mizuki's face, the boy's previous instructor, Haruka couldn't help but feel a little smug as well. He told him Naruto was a better shinobi, but Mizuki hadn't listened and wasn't that a kick in the ass. Naruto came out with his hit IAT-6 tied over his head, his bandana stuffed in a pocket of his jacket. The fact that his hair was uncovered had many of his classmates blinking in surprise at the bright blonde strands, having forgotten the actual color after 4 years of not seeing it. "Passed," Naruto said, stopping by his equally quiet friend. Shino said. "Yeah. We report at the end of the week for team placement. Let's go." Naruto replied, "Want to stop and get some dango?" "Fine," Shino consented, and they disappeared. Neither commented or paid any attention to the quiet study or glowers of other newly made genin or failed classmates. They had better things to do. "Here is the list of genin who are now up for team selection and final testing," Yumino said, handing out the lists of names to the different jounin. Out of the 30 who'd attended the academy, only 18 had actually taken the exam and passed. Out of those numbers, Haruka suspected only 9 would actually make the cut. "Ah, so Naruto-kun passed, good," the Hokage said with a smile. "I knew he'd do well." "He and Aburame Shino are very dedicated," Haruka said with a smile. "We have a very good batch this year. We may end up with at least 3 teams depending on the jounin and who gets teamed up with whom." The Hokage smiled at the scarred chunin and wished once again the young man wanted to be a jounin and perhaps head the academy eventually instead of staying as an instructor. However, he respected the man's will of fire and doubted he'd be able to convince Haruka before the man decided he wanted it himself. "Any final suggestions?" the Hokage asked, making the man pause. "Comments?" Haruka hesitated. "Uchiha-kun is a bit unstable in his relationships. I'd advise a jounin who could focus totally on the boy and not his background. If there was a jounin who would suit and be willing to take him on as an apprentice, I would suggest that, but it would do nothing for his social and emotional isolation unless he was involved in numerous interactions of different sorts. If Yamanaka-sen was taking a team, I'd suggest him if only for psychological evaluation, otherwise Yuuhi-sen would probably serve him well." The newly made jounin instructor blinked her red eyes at him in surprise. "I looked over all of the requirements and skills of those who were volunteered or put up as probable sensei," he said in way of explanation when he recognized the question in those ruby orbs. "Not hot Aki Kakashi?" Sarutobi asked. The aforementioned jounin beeped an eyebrow at the academy instructor, who sighed and shook his head in denial. "Hot Aki-san has my greatest regards as a jounin, however he's not knowledgeable on how to deal with the Uchiha's isolationist issues, self-inflicted negativity, and avenger mentality." Kakashi winced but agreed. He wasn't entirely able to handle his own, let alone Sasuke's, emotional burdens. He had wanted the boy due to his connection with Obito and his own Sharingan, but it might be better to take him on as an apprentice after he made Chunin. The instructor, however, continued, though he felt bad for the slightly defeated look on the copy nin's face. "While an excellent shinobi," Kakashi earned another apologetic glance, "it is my suggestion that a well-seasoned jounin instructor or Yuuhi-san get him," Haruka said firmly. "The rest of the class is mostly fine, though the Kunoichi need to be firmly trained out of their fangirl mentalities." Sarutobi muffled a chortle, he'd heard this complaint before. "Would you like me to throw them to Mitarashi Anko or something?" he offered, amused. "If it helped, yes," was the blunt reply, making several of the people in the room wince. Haruka continued in a quite droll manner, they stalk and chase Uchiha-kun around town, making it even more difficult for him to form connections and interact on a normal basis with society, never mind the damn civilian council's interference. Aruno-san is particularly violent towards anyone who puts him in any type of negative light, and more than once a fight has erupted between her and Yamanaka Ino, even to the extent of having to send one or both to the nurse's office afterwards. Many of the boys don't work or want to work with him because of this, or merely cannot since he's isolated both by his name and followers. The only two who don't regularly pick a fight with him, his fangirls, or any others in class are Aburame and Uzumaki, and that's only because they're the ones that get picked on, isolated from the rest of the class, and oftentimes are verbally and/or physically attacked by the collective rest. They've retreated from the worst of the failures during their time at the academy, which is something I actually approve. Considering they're in the correct mind to be effective, well-rounded shinobi instead of merely pretending to be one like many of the students I taught this year, their choice was the correct one. The Hokage nodded. Your evaluations are quite valuable, Yumino-san, Sarutobi said gravely. We will of course take all of that into consideration and put it to the greatest use. Do keep up the good work. You are dismissed, the Chunin bowed and left. Turning back to his other shinobi, the Sandaime laced his fingers and rested his chin on top of them in silent contemplation. Any requests? He asked as he watched the higher-ranked jounin and shinobi go through the lists and study the different skill sets. He was fairly certain that his son would take on the new Inoshikacho group, however Kurenai and Kakashi were a mystery to him. The red-eyed woman studied the list, her lips turned down a fraction. If it's alright with you, I'll take on Haruno, Hyuga and Uchiha, she said to the silver-haired jounin. The other three, that is Aburame, Uzumaki and Inyazuka, seemed to suit infiltration, espionage and tracking. Things a former Anbu would excel at. Kakashi nodded, handing her the paper and whipping out his little orange book. He read a few pages before a giggle escaped. The Genjutsu mistress flinched in anger before stomping down the immediate need to castrate him and turned to the Hokage with a smile. Hokage-sama, here are my choices, she handed him the paper with a list of names circled. Also, she continued, her lips turning up in a smirk, Kakashi-san said he'd take all the Tora missions for the next 3 months, with or without his genin squad. Did he now? Sarutobi asked, glancing at the giggling ninja as he read his little orange book. He rather doubted the man said that, but a happy Kunoichi mean a happy and healthy Hokage, so he let it go. I'll make sure to mark it down. Hi. She said brightly, thinking, take that, pervert. Congratulations, Shibi said when the two boys presented their hit IA to the clan head. Now, Saki will be teaching Naruto-kun the Kage Bushin no Jutsu while I explain the next Jutsu to Shino. The blonde beamed and got up to follow Saki as she motioned him to follow. The special clan techniques Shino was learning could only be taught to him, and it would be better to keep them a secret outside of battle, even to his best friend. Have fun, Shino, Naruto said softly before disappearing down the hall, heading for the dojo. Shino nodded and turned his focus completely back to his father, who motioned for him to remove his jacket as he took off his own. Slowly the swarms in both of their bodies expelled themselves and buzzed around each other, trading information, the next secret technique transferring that way, making genetic memories in the specialized insect saved in them from countless previous generations come to the fore. Slowly the hum died down, and the Kakechu separated and slowly returned to their respective hosts. Shino slowly entered his meditative state, letting his mind communicate with his insects once more. A few hours later he looked up and Shino's sunglasses gleamed in pleasure as he bowed to his father and sensei, making the clan head smiled. Excellent. Now is the time for practice. Shino nodded sharply and stood, his jacket going back on. Swinging his arms out, he ordered, Hijutsu. Mushidama-7. The insects immediately swirled out and enveloped the practice dummy that stood at the center of the training field, put there by an expectant Shibi earlier in the day. And a sphere before converging on it. Eyebrows going up in pleasure, he smiled slightly behind his collar. This will be quite effective. Naruto easily learned the ninjutsu, his clones forming solidly next to him in a neat line. The only trouble he was having was the amount, though he was slowly getting a hand of it, which pleased both the covered-up blonde and his sensei. Good, Saki said with a warm smile, you've got a good hand on it now, Naru-chan. Thank you, Naruto said with a sigh of relief. This is a very good jutsu for you, Saki said as they fell into their usual seated and relaxed mode of conversation. While allowing for you to have multiple partners in setting up your nets and detaining prisoners, there is a special ability that you should know. Yes? Naruto asked curiously. The clones have the ability to learn. Anything a clone does, see, or learns is passed on to you. Saki told him. Naruto's face blanked for a moment as the implications hit before blinking slowly. A smile slowly formed on his face and then bloomed into a grin. Amazing, he whispered. His sensei chuckled in agreement, secretly knowing that with this technique and the boy's prisoner, he'd be a force to reckon with. Especially with the tight and advanced control he'd learned at her hands and those in the Aburame clan. He bowed to her, "Thank you for teaching me something so useful, Aburame-sensei." She smiled proudly. "You are welcome, Naru-chan," she said warmly. "You're free to go now. You've successfully learned it. I'm sure you'll want to test it out yourself." Naruto gave her another bow and scampered off to find his best friend and her son, no doubt going to drag him off to one of the off-compound training grounds to demonstrate and experiment. Getting up, she stretched a bit before heading back into the family room where her husband sat, quietly proud. "He took to it like a moth to light," she told him as she settled next to him, pulling her mending over to her. "Ah, Shino did as well," her husband said, enjoying the evening breeze. "They probably won't be back until late," Saki mused. "Naruto is going to experiment that new technique into the ground. It's only proper to do so," Shibi stated logically, and she hummed. "I'm glad they had dinner already and that Ichiraku's is open so late, they'll need the food later." She paused in her work and met his gaze damply. "They're growing up and doing so well." "We raised them well," her husband replied in a comforting manner. "We've done a good job." She smiled at that. "Good." Naruto and Shino landed in their usual training ground excitedly. "I wish you could learn this technique," Naruto said forlornly. "It would have great use to you as well." "I shall endeavor to do so when I have larger chakra reserves," Shino stated. He marveled at all the information his best friend had passed along and felt a bit envious over his reserves, but understood it came with its downsides. Naruto had fought a battle over the last 6 years to have such fine control over his chakra, something so necessary in this work and in his own personal fighting style. "I'm glad you got a new technique," Naruto said with a smile. "It is your 8th one, correct?" "Yes, there's about more to learn," Shino replied. "They're all B and A class, so I am sure I'll learn more as I progress. And develop some. Everyone in the Aburame clan has their own tricks," Naruto pointed out, and Shino nodded in agreement. "Well, then, are you prepared to spar?" Shino's eyebrows twitched and he went into his usual stance as Naruto leaped back and joined the shadows in his own. "Ready?" His voice wafted out softly. "Go." Shino replied and they struck. A few hours later both were taking a break. "Very interesting technique," Shino told Naruto as he lay out on the ground, his bandana off and blonde hair mussed slightly. The long blonde strands glittering golden in the moonlight. "I think I will have to experiment some more with it, the potential currently is limitless," Naruto agreed, sitting up. He frowned a bit when he realized part of his carefully done hair was loose and just sighed, taking out the rest of the pins. The golden strands fell like water though, and Naruto massaged his head in satisfaction. The peacefulness of the night, however, was cut short when two familiar chunin burst into the clearing. "Mizuki!" Haruka roared, both of them battling it out. The two newly made genin separated out of the way, hiding in the surround forest. The gray-haired teacher threw a series of shuriken at Haruka before he surged forward and caught the scarred chunin in a series of punishing blows. They gained some distance between them once more and Mizuki smirked. "Ha! As if you could catch me, weakling," Mizuki taunted. Naruto narrowly watched where the teacher was moving and quickly formed his signs before calling out, "Kage Bushin no Jutsu." 10 clones appeared from above the silver-haired teacher in a pummeling force he narrowly dodged. "Ah!" Mizuki said, skidding to a halt with his back to the woods. "That demon brat's here as well. Lucky." Haruka's eyes widened and he shot forward. "Hey, Uzumaki, do you know why everyone hates you?" "I can tell you." Naruto narrowed his gaze and merely continued his work. Haruka, however, was infuriated. The silent weave of the Jorōgumo's apprentice and his clones went unnoticed, however. The clones had served their purpose fully by scattering a series of super strong spider wires in a complicated manner as they attacked. "Don't speak, Mizuki. You're already in trouble for stealing the forbidden scroll, don't you dare reveal an S-class secret on top of it. Especially one that would hurt my students." Haruka shouted, unknowingly leading the man into Naruto's trap. The traitor shot forward to meet him and froze in surprise when he realized he had razor-sharp wires wrapped around him and silent capture. The original Naruto stepped out and the gleam of wires could be seen between his fingers and tied to Kakute. Golden web. Ensnaring prey. He looked the teacher over and voiced his opinion plainly, "Fool." He easily noted part of his best friend's colony slowly crawling up the man's body from his prone position. "You." Mizuki snarled before stiffening further when he felt something moving over his body. Finally noticeable on his dark gray shirt, unlike they had been on his black pants, were Kakashi. They swirled in an angry orb around him. "Swarm," Shino bit out as he stepped out from behind him. "Finish him quickly," he stated coldly. The bugs covered the traitor and Mizuki let out a muffled scream of terror and shock. Shino was more than a little pissed with the teacher's treachery and verbal abuse. They'd suffered under this man for 7 years and were not going to put up with it now that he proved to be deceitful, especially the comments towards his best friend. Iruka, on the other hand, collapsed to his knees in relief, Naruto moving over to check on him. The glow of green chakra from his hands had the teacher smiling a bit proudly at the blonde. "Is there nothing you can't do?" he asked tiredly. "You two really should have been the rookies of the year." Shino shook his head and allowed his insects to return to him as the teacher went limp from chakra exhaustion, only Naruto's threads holding him up. "A shinobi does not stand out," Shino stated, "he does his work successfully until he dies with honor in battle or of old age." The academy instructor smiled proudly before accepting a ration bar from Naruto and subsiding into a sitting position on the ground. Naruto moved over to their prisoner and pulled out some hemp rope. "You're right," Iruka said as he watched the rather impressive hojujutsu his blonde-haired student demonstrated. He stared up at the sky and smiled as the flashes of Anbu appearing denoted their appearance. "Want to get some raiment to celebrate? After the Hokage debriefs us, of course." The two boys exchanged a look and nodded, "We'd be happy to," Shino stated. "You two have completed a B rank," Shibi said amazement the next morning as the two returned dead on their feet from a night of debriefing, raiment, capturing traitors, and training. Mizuki-sensei proved to be a traitor and came charging into the training ground Naruto and I were, and we assisted Yamino-sensei in capturing and detaining him until Anbu could arrive, Shino admitted tiredly. Naruto just sleepily nodded, his blonde hair gathered in a plait over his left shoulder. "We were even going to be paid," Naruto said with a yawn. The Aburame head blinked in surprise. "I guess congratulations are in order," the man said. "Can we celebrate it after a few hours of sleep?" Shino asked. His father nodded his consent. "Good. Why?" "Because Naruto has already fallen asleep in his ramen bowl at Ichiraku's, we're that tired." Later that week, after getting their pictures taken and the other paperwork done, they returned to the academy for the final time as students and rejoined their other advancing classmates, taking their usual isolated spot as per usual. Iruka-sensei strode in and started listing off the teams. Team 7 will be Aburame Shino, Inyazuka Kiba, and Uzumaki Naruto. Iruka called out. "Your sensei and team leader is Hot Aki Kakashi." The two best friends turned as one to stare at the loudest boy in class, and Naruto nodded at Shino before motioning Inyazuka over to their secluded corner. The Chunin continued listing off as the dog ninja approached warily. "Hello," Naruto said politely, "I am Uzumaki Naruto. I'll be in your care." He gave a polite bow. Shino merely tipped his head to the side and repeated the greeting. Yeah," Kiba said, taking in the quietest members of the whole class, even Hyuga and Uchiha, made some noise. Stutters, yelps, and grunts counted after all. "I'm Kiba and this is Akamaru. We're in your, care, yeah." He presented his dog and was surprised when Naruto's eyes wrinkled at the corners, as though he was smiling. Shino merely nodded again. "May I?" Naruto asked, holding out the back of his hand, taking it out of his pocket after slipping off his kakute. The skin was golden color. No matter how much he covered or kept to the shadows, it never seemed to be as pale as Shino's. Sure, Akamaru, friend," he told the dog, who glanced at him like he was stupid and sniffed the hand before licking it happily. The sapphire sky blue eyes crinkled again, and the black-dressed boy smoothed a hand calmly over the dog's head in greeting. "I look forward to working with you, Akamaru. I have heard many good things about your clan," the boy told the dog solemnly. Akamaru barked in agreement. "Do you train with him often?" Naruto asked Kiba, who seemed a little thrown. "Eh?" Kiba asked, startled. "Oh, yeah, but we've only been together for a few months, so we're still getting to know each other." Naruto nodded, gave the puppy another soft pat and withdrew his hand, slipping it back into his pocket and sliding his rings back on. The shriek of a fangirl, namely Haruno, made them all cringe. "Damn," Kiba said, rubbing his ears grumpily as they all stared at the growing catfight between the blonde Yamanaka and pink-haired Haruno. "I think she burst an eardrum. Thank Kami there's no crazy chicks on our team." His new teammates nodded. "The Kakachu are overjoyed," Shino admitted. "Why?" "Because they're glad that they will never be near that kind of shriek again. At least I hope not." Naruto grimaced and nodded, glancing over at the newly formed teammate. He felt a bit bad for Hinata-chan and Uchiha-kun. Neither Uchiha nor Hinata looked particularly excited about their final teammate, and Uchiha even looked a bit miserable through his stony facade. "I think Uchiha-kun would cry if it was not unmanly." Hinata-chan is not one of his stalkers, however, so he has at least one able-bodied teammate, Uzumaki said. "Haruno is going to be useless in the field unless it relates to mooning over him." Shino snorted in amusement and nodded. Kiba grinned and then winced when the girls started clawing and screaming at each other some more. Iruka's yells to stop them were ineffectual and merely added to the cacophony. There was a reason why he disliked cats, and the fangirls' attempts to copy the creatures did not endear them to him. Well, Kiba said, settling in with the other two boys, slightly more at ease, I think we'll get along okay. Hello sensei, Shino said calmly, staring at the door as it slowly opened. The silver-haired Jounin blinked lazily at them, taking in their three figures, and said, my initial impression. He pointed at each of them in turn, starting with Shino, then going to Naruto and Kiba, and said, mute, weird, dumb. His gaze landed on Akamaru, cute. All of them felt fairly insulted. Meet me on the roof. He then disappeared. The general consensus between them was he is an asshole. Naruto glanced at Shino, who nodded. The man was prank-worthy. They glanced out the window, then at Kiba before opting to take the stairs. Both males had been trained in tree walking early on to enhance their control, though Shino hadn't mastered it yet, and was something ridiculously necessary for Naruto, who had an absurd amount in his reserves. Beep, Kiba muttered lowly as he followed his two teammates out of the room, Akamaru giving an agreeing bark from his place on Kiba's head. They got to the roof easily and found the man laying down on his side reading a distinctive orange book. Naruto took note and smiled behind his mask, glad to find a weakness, while Shino, who also recognized it, had a look of distaste cross his features, wrinkling his brow and causing his sunglasses to flash dangerously in dislike. Kiba didn't appear to know what it is and merely flopped down in a sprawl, with Akamaru leaping down from his head to a place on the roof next to them. Okay group, introductions. Name, likes, dislikes, and dream or hope. Kakashi said, taking them in. Naruto instantly sat between his two teammates, forming a comforting barrier between the noisy Kiba and the nearly mute Shino. Akamaru sat next his master, albeit slightly in front of both Uzumaki and Inuzuka, his ears fondly scratched by his new second favorite human. Kiba took the lead, I'm Inuzuka Kiba, and this is my partner Akamaru, the dog barked, and Kakashi couldn't help but smile at him, reminded of his own Ninken. I like Akamaru and hanging out with him, as well as training. I dislike cats and my ma's and sister's nagging. My dream is to be the best shinobi my clan has ever seen and to learn all of the Inuzuka Hijutsu with Akamaru. Kakashi nodded and calmly turned to look at Naruto, who nodded before introducing himself. I am Uzumaki Naruto, he gave a slight bow, which Kakashi answered it a bit awkwardly from his laid-out position, earning a laugh from the brazen Inuzuka. I like training with Aburame Sensei, Ramen, Pranks, Shino, and the Aburame clan. I have also recently developed an interest in acquiring new poisons and venoms while during bug excursions to the exterior of Konohagakure with my best friend Shino and his clan. I dislike those who kill senselessly, are without true purpose, and belittle others without truly knowing or understanding their victim or their circumstance. I also have a dislike for those who mistreat any form of life, be it human or not. My goal is to excel at such a level that I one day become an elite Jounin or even Hokage. Ah, good, Kakashi said, a bit surprised by his sensei's son. He had his behavior and calm demeanor, though he was missing the same hobbies. Minato-sensei had been a fanatic about his Fuinjutsu. The last few words in his introduction, however, demonstrated his mother's fire and father's will. Something the 26-year-old approved of. His gaze lazily moved on, and he gestured at the Aburame seated tautly next to the quiet blonde who gently scratched Akamaru's back, earning a pleased huff with each friendly scrape. You're next and I'll go last. Shino nodded stiffly. I am Aburame Shino, he stated, I like training, my Kakachu, Naruto, and finding new insects to add to my colonies. I dislike pesticides, fire used to destroy insects with no due cause, and senseless killing as well. My long-term goals are to become an adept leader of my clan one day, master my clan's Hijutsu, and find a never-before-seen insect or an incredibly rare one. Kakashi nodded and tilted his head to the side. Well, as you can guess, I am Hotaki Kakashi, a Jounin. I don't particularly like anything, have few dislikes and no real dreams or hobbies. The trio just stared at him. I think we can add on pathetic to asshole, Kiba thought. The man, however, didn't seem fazed and continued, meet me tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for your final genin exam at training field 7. Don't eat breakfast if you can, if you do you'll probably puke. He then escaped, shoe-shining away, leaving the genin on the roof alone. Kiba blinked at the quick escape before the word sank in. What do you mean final exam? He shouted, setting off the Kakachu, and his two teammates had a hell of a time settling them back down. The loud boy winced since Kiba was fairly sure he could feel the look of utmost annoyance, and anger burned into the back of his head. Akamaru merely put his head down on his paws and whimpered at his partner's idiocy. Naruto woke up early and stretched. His long blonde hair glinting in the weak morning light as it reached his mid-back in its usual tangle. Sitting neatly in his sleeping kimono, he removed his futon and stuffed it tidily into the closet before praying quietly before an altar. Though he may not know who his parents or ancestors were, he could still respect them. After that he began preparing for the day by immediately stripping his night clothes off and brushing his hair out before carefully pinning it up out of the way. His underclothes went on next, a long-sleeve mesh shirt over a sleeveless mask shirt that clung to his toned chest, and trousers with multiple obvious and hidden pockets. His weapon cases, weapons, and jacket went on after a quick check to make sure the mask was covering everything. His new hit I-8 was sewn onto the upper left side of his jacket, and the metal dulled so it didn't shine. His bandana went on last, and after a final check and additions he headed to Sakuyaba's sense to pick up the team lunch they'd prepared the previous night and eat breakfast. Something Naruto had come up with after Kiba had apologized, and the trio had a congratulatory dinner at Ichiraku's, where the dog user ranted for a few minutes in peace over the unfairness. Flashback. Enough, Shino finally said, silencing the loud boy to Naruto and Akamaru's relief. The small pup had taken refuge in his new teammate's lap and was happily eating pieces of food Kiba had prepared ahead of time. Naruto, meanwhile, was happy to pet and eat his ramen carefully around the small animal, even sneaking him a piece of noodle from time to time. Akamaru was definitely happy with where he was sitting. All of the teams are going through the same in Yazuka-san, Naruto said wryly when Shino didn't continue to explain and returned to his own meal. Kiba's fine, he said, scratching his short hair before slurping up some more noodles. Kiba-kun, Naruto continued. I'm sure every shinobi went through the same. The dog ninja sighed with a nod and picked up the bowl to drink the delicious broth and catch the last few tasty bits. He sat the bowl down with a clank and sigh of pleasure before a frown formed. I'm not looking forward to missing out on breakfast, Kiba muttered before ordering a second bowl of ramen with both pork and beef ribs. Naruto merely smiled and finished his third off before motioning for a fourth, much to his best friend's exasperation. Shino finished his single bowl and turned to the gyoza he ordered on the side. Variety was best in his mind, though he was becoming fonder of ramen, if only because of how good Ichiraku's was. I don't think you should, Naruto admitted, however, I was thinking of talking to Sakuyabe-sen about packing a group lunch for a picnic for us. If he's even the slightest bit late we can eat early. Aren't you worried about, puking? Kiba asked bluntly. Naruto shrugged. One can throw up on a full or empty stomach. It actually hurts more, in my personal opinion, to do so on an empty one. I'll just have something light for breakfast, nothing heavy or greasy that could cause it to upset easily. Naruto said calmly. I guess you're right. Kiba said with a nod before frowning at Akamaru who barked at him. What do you mean I'd be dumb to not eat? Wait, you just called me dumb. Shino muffled another snort of amusement and Naruto just focused on getting more noodles in his mouth and not on the dog as he struggled to keep from laughing. Flashback end. Naruto stepped politely up to the open door and bowed before being motioned in by a bemused Shibi. One would think after 6 years of living and eating with the Aburames Naruto would have lost some of his stiff and formal politeness. He hadn't though, and it seemed to only grow stronger with each year and kind gesture. Settling in his usual spot he glanced around for Shino. He slept a bit late, Saki said as she finished placing the food on the table. Naruto nodded in understanding as she returned to the kitchen. Shino shuffled in as she brought out the stacked multi-family bento box that the blonde accepted with a bow of thanks. Thank you for all the help last night, he told her as he placed it next to him. The two of them had cooked a large lunch for them all, though Naruto had been uncertain for a few moments what to fix for Akamaru and merely boiled some chicken and kept it in a separate dish to keep it from mixing with anything else. It had all of their favorites, and Naruto hoped everyone would be able to enjoy it. It was nice to cook with you again, Naru-chan, Saki said taking her spot. Shino joined them and studied the boxed lunch for a moment before speaking. Winter melon? He asked staring at it. Naruto smiled. Shino was surprisingly adept at smelling out his favorite vegetable. And soup and salad, Naruto answered easily. We also have miso soup with eggplant, mixed tempura, tamagoyaki, fried dumplings, onigiri, meat and vegetable buns, cold noodles, smoked and grilled fish, garlic chicken. Shino grimaced a bit, recalling the strong smell which Naruto ignored since he liked that kind of chicken, beef stir-fry with vegetables, pork short ribs, and dessert. That sounds delicious. Shino stated before digging into his rice and pickles. Both were too nervous for anything overly heavy and even forwent their usual tamagoyaki and soup. They didn't want to overburden themselves or their stomachs. They finished and were wished luck. They got there 15 minutes early and Naruto blinked in surprise at Kiba who apparently camped out at the field. The boy glanced up at them as he paused in brushing his teeth and scratched his hair in embarrassment. Ahahaha. He said in way of greeting and Akamaru merely gave a doggy sigh, embarrassed by his partner. Naruto set the lunch down and waved off the apology and settled himself on a bench, leaving the shadier spot for Shino. Kiba hurried through the last of his morning ablutions while Akamaru came up to Naruto and hopped into his lap again. Naruto instantly went about petting and scratching him. Akamaru really likes you, Kiba said studying his best friend with some surprise. Inyazuka dogs were usually more standoffish than this. Akamaru however seemed to be even closer to this boy than his own litter mates. The dog barked a reprimand and Kiba scratched his head in embarrassment. Not that there's anything wrong with you, Naruto. I've always done well with animals, especially canines, Naruto admitted, waving off the implied insult. He attracts butterflies as well, Shino said, hiding his smirk behind his collar when his friend glared at him. That was an embarrassing secret that was supposed to stay in the Aburame compound and between them. Kiba merely laughed aloud at it. The dog boy's stomach growled and Naruto glanced at him sympathetically. Do you want to eat some of the lunch for breakfast? Kiba nodded sheepishly and Naruto efficiently unpacked the bento and fixed the boy a plate before handing over a cup of soup and eating implements. Naruto then fetched out the boiled chicken for Akamaru and handed it over to Kiba, who glanced at it warily, although apologetically. Ah, thanks, sorry, Kiba said with a grin and tried a piece of the boiled chicken Naruto made for Akamaru before letting the puppy have some, along with some rice and tamagoyaki. Naruto wasn't offended, understanding it was part of training and Kiba's responsibilities. Eating quickly, the genin watched the sun move across the sky and after an hour Naruto built 2 more plates and refilling Kiba's, so they were all eating and chatting quietly. After 3 hours the trio were already practicing and sparring. Kiba was pleased to be working with another partner genin and was fast enough to give Shino a challenge, while Naruto practiced some animal-related hojujutsu on Akamaru, who was amused to be captured and neatly bound. The loud explosion disrupted it all, and Naruto nearly face-planted in surprise, though he quickly untied Akamaru and escaped into the bush to observe, his bow shuriken-1 quickly sliding free from their arm holsters and in the palms of his hand. They were laced in a sedative and mild hallucinogen that would bring down most people and disorientate those more experienced. Akamaru took a stance next to the boy, his hackles going up. Shino and Kiba also retreated, though not into the woods, and instantly assumed defensive positions, the Kakashi swarming and Kiba moving into his clan's wild taijutsu stance. The smoke disappeared and Kiba face-planted. Yo, Kakashi said, approving of the instantaneous defensive and observational positions they took. What was the third thing Kiba stated as his favorite thing to do? Shino quizzed him sharply. Training, Kakashi said with a nod of approval. He felt the subtle pressure of chakra in an attempt to dissolve any genjutsu he may have been preforming and approved further. He smells right, Kiba said, getting up from eating dirt and whistling for Akamaru, who appeared from another spot dashing out to join his partner. Naruto said, coming into the open. I assume we shall begin taking our test. No questions as to why I'm late? Kakashi asked, a bit disappointed. He had such good excuses too. Would you tell us the truth, Hot Aki-sensei? Shino said, moving up to flank his best friend as he joined them in not quite reaching or kicking distance. No. Then let's skip the spiel and go straight to the test, Kiba said with a grin full of teeth. Good, now, did you eat breakfast? He asked. He looked them over and already knew the answer. Yes, Naruto replied calmly, more like brunch to be honest. If you want some food there's plenty waiting for you. Oh, well, he said with a put-out sigh. He brought out the 2 lunchboxes. I guess you won't need this. Good job disobeying your commanding officer. The last sentence was sarcastic and highly unappreciated by Naruto, who merely beeped a brow. You're our commanding officer? Naruto asked with an eye smile of his own. I thought we had to pass a test first. Sneaky, Kakashi thought as he took in those twinkling sapphire blue eyes. I guess you're correct. The jounin said. Well then, onto the test. He fished out 2 bells and dangled them before the 3 boys. This test only has a 66% pass rate, he said solemnly. To pass 2 of the 3 of you must get one of these bells. The person who doesn't get a bell will go back to the academy for another year. Kiba instantly looked fearful, though he hid it under bravado, while the other 2 scoffed, or well, seemed cynical in their usual fashion, Shino arching a brow and Naruto tilting his head to the side and shaking it slightly. Doubtful, Shino stated dryly. Genin teams are made up of 3 genin and a jounin teacher. The only time they're rebuilt after the initial assigning is in the case of a member's death, serious debilitating and career-ending injury, or irreconcilable differences and difficulties between the members that result in critical and multiple mission failures. Eh? Kiba asked, glancing at his new teammates, his expression confused. Akamaru, however, and Naruto were nodding in agreement. It was a sad day in ninja life when your dog was smarter than you, though Kiba hasn't seemed to notice it yet, Kakashi thought. Well, Kakashi said, you still need to get these bells off of me. He pulled out a timer and set it for an hour, within this time limit, which is 1 single hour. The person who I believe fails the most gets tied to one of the training posts and left there overnight. Understood? Kakashi asked. The trio of boys and the puppy nodded. Good, then ready, set, go. The trio jumped back into the woods and vanished as the Kakashi attacked him as a distraction. Eye smiling, Kakashi wondered if this would be the first team he ever passed. Naruto and Shino motioned Kiba closer and the trio put their heads together. "He's weird," Kiba muttered with Akamaru softly barking in agreement. "True," Naruto said, "but now we plan." "What about the two-bell rule?" Kiba asked worriedly as he crouched next to the bandana boy. "As illogical as it is, Naruto and I could stand another year at that school if it meant becoming a genin," Shino stated, making Naruto grimace behind his mask, but nod seriously. "Worse come to worse, we'll just steal the bells and his book," Naruto said. "We should probably do that anyway." "His book?" Kiba asked. "That orange one he was reading last night." "Yes," Naruto said, "did you recognize it?" Kiba shook his head. Naruto hummed and explained. "It is one of the Uchiha books." The dog boy's eyebrows shot up. "Porn?" He cackled in question, muffling his laughter behind a tan palm. Naruto pinked a bit and even Shino shifted a bit awkwardly at the blatant evaluation before recovering. "Well, read too," Shino said, adjusting his glasses in disgust. It was practically dog-eared. "No offense meant," he said to Akamaru, who merely gave a doggy grin of understanding. "So," Kiba said with a slow smirk, "get the book and we win the battle." Amazingly, all the perverts felt a disturbance in the force at this, especially the super pervert and owner of said soon-to-be stolen book, causing them to shudder and in the case of the super pervert flee from his newly made peephole. Kurenai and Tsunade, along with other Kunoichi who strongly disapproved of such habits, felt oddly satisfied. Kakashi wasn't surprised when Akamaru and Kiba came charging out from two different wooded positions. They were the team's obvious lead attacker, along with Aburame's Kakechu. Since he'd been brushing off the little chakra eaters for the past few minutes, as carefully as possible since he knew the attack was coming with every single gentle swipe. He hadn't wanted to kill the beetles, he'd seen what happened when you did, and the owner's retribution was a thing of nightmares. He dodged their oncoming rush with ease and watched them vanish back into the tree line. He was surprised, however, when he felt a slender line collapse under his weight and a net dropping down out of nowhere to capture him. He quickly dodged it and a sudden swarm of Kakechu before ducking a series of shuriken. His one eye widened as the metal stars suddenly exploded, filling the area with smoke. His hand went to waste to protect the bells, and he quickly fended two attacks to that area. He had to hide a wince when he heard the audible snap of Akamaru's jaws close to his special place though. He leapt free of the smoke and into another wire trap, which this time was sticky like a spider's web. The former Anbu then had Naruto dropping out of seemingly nowhere on top of him, his feet colliding with his stomach, knocking the breath out of the former Anbu as the small boy reared back before swinging his fist forward. Kakashi defended himself from a punch and felt the prick of metal on his skin and the slow numbing of a fast-acting sedative. Damn, he thought in admiration, assassination tactics with a mix of capture and surprise. Very good teamwork as well, he finished in amusement. Naruto's sandals connected with his torso once more and the smallest boy in the group shoved back away from the man's reach, his hand stretching out to wrap the man further in a new part of the web, encasing him. Uzumaki landed and pulled the wires taut, locking him in with his hands splayed flat and ineffective against his thighs. Golden web. Encased prey, the trap user said as he planted his feet and weighed the wires down. A swarm of Kakechu appeared and captured the bells from his grasp, as well as something in his hip pocket, before they drained him of his chakra. He gave a token struggle, his arms locked to his body. He hadn't sensed Naruto setting up any traps and was rather irked that he'd missed it. "Got it?" Kiba asked Shino, who nodded, and a small swarm of bugs appeared, dropping something between them. Kakashi instantly sweat dropped and felt a shiver of fear go down his spine. "My baby." His mind screamed. Sitting placidly on the ground was his favorite Uchiha book. Akamaru sauntered to stand next to the orange-bound novel and stood rather perilous over it. His back leg went up and a look of evil crossed the dog's features, as well as the boy standing behind the little dog. "Please no," Kakashi said, not above begging as a second swarm of bugs deposited the bells next to it. "Is this a pass, sensei?" Naruto asked mildly and earned a fevered nod. Naruto nodded and the trio turned and walked away. "Where are you going?" Kakashi called out. He wiggled a bit, hoping the wires would loosen, now that Naruto wasn't holding them. He noticed rather belatedly that they were pinned to the ground with weights and seals, meant to absorb any chakra that ran over it. When did Naruto get into Fuinjutsu? He pondered as he struggled. "Nowhere," Kiba called back as they settled next to his encampment and the partially eaten lunch. "We're having lunch. Aren't you going to get me down?" Maybe he shouldn't have been so lax about his defense, especially when he heard the calm response from Shino. "Maybe, but you did say the one who did the worst would get tied to a tree." Little bastards, he thought, and struggled harder. Feeling no give, he collapsed forward limply and miserably eyed his book. Fuck. The Hokage had a deceptively somber look on his face when the Jounin returned that evening to give their genin assessments. His eyes, however, were silently laughing whenever they settled on Team 7 Sensei. The shinobi in question was currently cradling his Uchiha book protectively. All of the jounin were staring at him like he lost his mind as he muttered and stroked it apologetically. It was handled with a fondness that wasn't even afforded to some serious romantic partners and was, quite frankly, incredibly creepy. The Hokage could barely keep from laughing out loud. "Report, hot Aki-kun," Sarutobi said, the humor was apparent in his voice, earning a glare. "Those little bas the genin of Team 7 have passed successfully." The man reported petulantly, his bottom lip poking out in a grumpy pout. "Would you please describe how they passed?" Kurenai asked in interest. The man turned and glared at her. "They acquired the bells through a startling amount of teamwork in roughly 10 minutes, about 30 minutes into the exam," he bit out. "Did they acquire any leverage?" The Sandaime asked, and the glare was withering. The silver-haired former Anbu muttered something lowly. "I'm sorry." The Hokage asked, enjoying this far too much. "They took my book hostage," he growled out after a moment. "Little bastards." "Tricky bastards," Asuma said with a grin earning an angry glower. "Well," the Hokage coughed, preventing the growing tension to come to a boil, "let's get this meeting over with so you can," he eyed the experienced silver-haired jounin in amusement, "comfort yourself and become acclimated to being instructors. I'm sure it will be an eye-opening experience for you all." If no one could meet Kakashi's eye for the rest of the night for fear of breaking down in hysterics, it was fine since the man was too busy comforting his baby. Zoom pretty much fell over when she learned how her son beat the bell test with his two teammates. While an excellent demonstration of cooperation and teamwork, it was hilarious how they used the one weakness their sensei exhibited to ensure that even if the worst happened and only two did pass, they could force him into passing all three. It had her rolling on the floor, clutching her stomach as tears fell from her face at the conviviality. Kiba and Akamaru merely sat pleased as they tore through dinner and talking about their two new teammates excitedly. And Akamaru really likes Naruto," Kiba said while Akamaru yipped in agreement. "Ah," Zoom said as she finally got control of herself and sat up, "Uzumaki Naruto, right?" Her son nodded and she fingered her chin in silent thought as her forehead twisted. "What's he like?" she asked since she missed most of his explanations and descriptions while laughing on the floor hysterically. Her own partner returned, finally joining them after having moved out of the room during her flails of excitement and mirth to avoid getting smacked. Kuramaru sat next to Akamaru, who instantly curled up next to him, barking up to the older Ninkin in conversation. "Quiet," Kiba said after a moment, "nice. He uses wires and Fuinjutsu. Poisons as well," Akamaru barked and Kiba nodded before continuing, "He like animals and Akamaru thinks he smells like tempered wildness and power." "He doesn't seem off or anything?" she asked in concern. While she didn't hate the Jinchuriki, she had concerns about his stability at times. Kiba thought it over while gnawing on a chewy bit of cartilage. "Nah, not really, the only thing weird about him is all the glares he gets," Kiba admitted with a confused frown. Akamaru stole his bandana as a prank, got to keep it though. His mother glanced at the dog, who now wore a black bandana around his neck rather jauntily. The pup looked rather well in it actually, and I accidentally messed up his mask during a spar, so he wasn't as covered up as usual. So while we were walking back, people kept giving him these looks. He seemed pretty uncomfortable about it and stuff. The glares were pretty harsh, I guess." Kiba frowned at this, and Zoom felt torn between feeling proud over her son's immediate close ties with his teammates and the fact one of his teammates might be a risk to him considering what he contained. However, she didn't let that color her voice or face. "Mostly." "Ah," Zoom said with a thoughtful nod. "I guess I can understand that," she muttered. "Eh?" Kiba said, glancing at his mother, who winced at the slip. "Nothing," she said with a head shake. "You were saying he wore a face mask." Kiba blinked before shrugging off the weirdness. "Yeah, he's got a really good nose. Not as sharp as mine or Akamaru's, but pretty good anyway." Kiba said with a smile, "He's pretty cool and a good cook. Lunch and breakfast was awesome." Smiling faintly at her son, Zoom couldn't help but think she'd have to meet the boy herself one of these days and make her own evaluations. Naruto smoothed his jacket and checked that his bandana was in place before leaving the house and joining Shino on the walk to the training ground, this time Shino carrying the pre-made lunch. They reached the training ground with time to spare and saw their other teammates already there. Akamaru bounded over and Naruto crouched down to stroke the puppy's head in greeting before switching out the bandanas. This one had a leaf emblem blazoned on black cloth in white and a ragged edge that was further highlighted by a border of bright green. "Like it?" Naruto asked. "You needed a hit I ate as well, though it doesn't have a metal plate, sorry." The dog barked in what Naruto thought was a compliment or thanks and hopped into his arms in an excited wiggle. Kiba seemed a bit amused and greeted Shino first, while the blonde and white dog were talking to each other. "Got lunch, ah?" Kiba said with a grin. "Thanks," and Shino gave a nod. "Naruto endeavors to make sure we have all the necessities possible," Shino stated, "he enjoys it as well." "Why?" Because it allows him quality bonding time with my mother, who also likes having someone to cook with. That's nice. Kiba replied, scratching his head. Hello, Kiba-kun, Naruto said, finally joining them. Akamaru hopped down, showing off his new accessory. Nice, Akamaru, Kiba complimented with a wild grin. Thank Naruto, he said, glancing up. Naruto merely smiled happily in a relaxed manner. It's nothing, Naruto said, waving it off. Another glance at the lunchbox had Kiba smacking himself. I almost forgot, he said in a mixture of apology and shout. My ma invited you guys over for dinner tonight if you're free. You know, a meet and greet. She said to invite you family as well. So I guess your parents are coming too. I shall notify my father, Shino said blandly, a Kakashi fluttering off. Will we need to bring anything? Naruto asked, his brows scrunching. Nah, Kiba said, just come by around 7, my ma said. She and Hana are fixing barbecue, I think. They'd actually set a nice sit-down dinner, but Kiba hardly remembered putting on his shoes this morning, never mind what he was told while half asleep. Then thank you for the invite and we will see you then, Naruto said with a polite bow. Shino nodded again, and Kiba scratched his cheek awkwardly. Well, wanna spar till the sensei gets here? Kiba suggested. Shino buzzed in excitement, no doubt looking forward to finishing what they'd started the other day. I'll practice my Fuinjutsu, just let me know when one of you wants to switch out, Naruto offered, stepping back and earning a nod from both. Watching them fight aggressively, Naruto snickered in amusement. Very energetic, like puppies that found a new playmate, he murmured before unsealing his Fuinjutsu training equipment. He'd let the boys be rowdy and wear themselves out, he had practice to do. Kakashi appeared 3 hours late once more in a small puff of smoke and took in the scene before him with a sharp eye. Kiba was crouched next to Naruto, trying his hand at making explosive tags, the easiest of the seals to make. Akamaru was napping curled between the pair while Shino sat quietly watching as his brother in all but blood gracefully guided his new teammate's hand through the motions. Keep a constant stream of chakra, the bandana-wearing boy said with confidence. The Inyazuka boy had a look of determination on his face and sat back with a sigh as they finished the small strokes. Let's test it, shall we? Naruto said, picking it up and wrapping it around a stone before focusing some chakra into it and tossing it into the center of the clearing. It fizzled for a moment before giving a dull thump and catching on fire more than exploding. Damn it. Kiba growled. I'll never get this. He scratched his head with both hands grumpily, ruffling his hair with vigor as he worked out his aggressions on himself. He calmed a tad when Naruto touched his shoulder comfortingly. It's a fine, you are still a beginner, Naruto said softly. Shino has no luck with it and it is a difficult branch of shinobi arts to master. It takes a lot of control and power. The feral boy nodded, looking slightly more chipper, and picked up the book laid out between them to study whatever was on the page intensely. The Jounin cleared his throat pointedly and the trio glanced up. Hello, my adorable students, Kakashi said, thinking little bastards. He still hadn't forgiven them for stealing his book and tying him up for 30 minutes, though he was secretly impressed by their abilities and attitude. Impressed, but not thrilled to have it used so effectively against him. Again, little bastards. How are you this day? Did you wait long? I hope it didn't bother you. Actually he did, he hoped it pissed them off as they pissed him off the other day. Not really, Kiba said distractedly. We barely realized you weren't there. A tick mark formed on the silver-haired man's head. Shino beeped his head in agreement and Naruto bowed apologetically before shrugging a bit helplessly. What are we doing today, Hataki-sensei? Naruto asked, gathering his supplies and putting them away, except for the book he let Kiba borrow. He rose gracefully and approached, leading his two teammates over after picking up Akamaru, who snuggled into him cutely. The silver-haired Jounin relented a bit at that. He was such a sucker for dogs. He still didn't forgive them though. Teamwork exercises, he said cheerfully, ignoring the need to ring the silent prank king who gazed so innocently up at him. A devious mind lurked behind those supposedly guileless and sweet sapphire blue orbs. Like the exam? Kiba asked, crossing his arms behind his head lazily, book jammed into his pocket for later. The man twitched visibly. No, not like the exam, he grit out. Battle tactics and group spars. Against you? Shino asked. His Kakashi could be heard buzzing just ever so slightly in excitement. Against each other, I want to further assess your capabilities. The Jounin stated. Shinobi were secretive, so he'd have to. Couldn't you ask us? Kiba questioned in a rather blunt manner. Would you tell me? The Jounin parried. Yes, the trio said as a group. Our lives depend on your leadership. Hiding skills would be foolish, Naruto stated, staring at him solemnly. The man blinked and studied the young genin. Okay then, Kakashi said, we'll begin with a brief evaluation of your capabilities, jutsu knowledge, and stamina. Have any of you mastered the tree walking exercise? Naruto nodded and raised his hand, his partners shook theirs. Kiba wasn't even sure what the tree walking exercise was, while Shino had just started on it a short while ago and needed some more time practicing it. The Kakashi eating up his reserves made his control better in some ways, but also worse, since he didn't use them often outside of clan Hijitsu. Kakashi turned to the wire using Genin and asked him to demonstrate it before starting the other two on practicing it and taking Naruto's side. He had the boy go up and down a few times before nodding. The blonde hadn't lied. He had it down like an experienced ninkin's nose after a scent. Water walking? He asked, studying him. Aburame-sensei and I perfected walking on water roughly a year ago. Naruto informed him with a proud eye sparkle. Why are you so advanced at chakra control? Kakashi asked, noting Shino knew well Kiba looked interested, both getting up from a recent fall and watching the pair as they paused and trying to go up. Naruto flushed a bit in embarrassment, the tops of his cheeks pinking over his dark gray mask. Kakashi fought the urge to coo. He secretly approved of the boy's outfit and was glad to have another mask-wearing shinobi on his team. After watching him eat yesterday, he knew the boy was skilled and experienced enough to eat without removing the mask, navigating the slip built into it like a pro. Not that his teammate Kiba noticed and was obviously curious over. He could see the food leading to his teammate's mouth. He just didn't know how it was getting in. My chakra reserves are very large and difficult to manage, Naruto admitted. It's why I can't use swords or long weapons since I put too much strength into things. Instinctive conduction of chakra energy, my instructors put it. Wire traps require precision and timing, as well as a good strong yank, so I have no problems with them. I'm accurate with hand weapons, but if it gets too large I have a habit of breaking the item in question. Shino, who had neatly leapt to the ground when he realized he was overpowering his next step and overheard, winced remembering the training staff Naruto had accidentally buried into a training post when his mother had tested him to see what weapons would serve his short height well. Kakashi nodded, remembering the boy's mother. While Kushina had been assigned an experience using an entire metal staff made of highly conductive chakra metal, she'd gone through heavy wooden, practice ones like toothpicks at a restaurant, shattering them with ease. The blonde wasn't done talking either. The shinobi also has to keep their presence down, and with my fighting style, having a loud chakra presence makes things difficult. I have to keep it under control, Naruto said. Can you release it so I can see? Kakashi asked, and Naruto nodded after a moment of hesitation and consideration. His body tensed before relaxing, and the Jounin blinked in surprise when the boy's energy washed over him energetically in waves, almost excited, as if happy to be released. Whoa, ah. Kiba said, falling from his tree in mid-run, startled by the sudden flux of power in the area. He stared in surprise at the source and sniffed. His chakra-enhanced senses were going haywire at the sudden influx of data. Even Shino seemed surprised as he paused on a branch. His best friend hadn't cut loose often in the past few years. The almost sweet-scented waves of energy glossed over both trackers in training like the first warm smell of a good restaurant after opening the door when you're hungry, intoxicating and delicious. That's a lot of energy, Kakashi marveled, his own nose catching the scent, and the genin nodded, the blonde's body twitching and straining as if to keep from running around. This is quite difficult, the blonde said, taking off his bandana, and his hair sprang free, the long blonde strands moving wildly. May I stop? He asked. The jounin nodded, still flummoxed. Instantly the power dampened, going down in steps as it was slowly folded away once more. Both of his teammates instantly missed the sweet smell and coating of power, but kept from saying anything. The expression on their teammate's face was one of focused control. The shortest boy's body calmed, and the anxious twitches went down until the boy sighed in obvious relief. He sunk to his knees before sitting down completely. Tired? Kakashi asked, crouching before the boy, who slowly gathered his hair up and draped it over one shoulder to braid. A simple black tie was pulled out of his pocket and draped over his thigh as he wove the soft golden strands. Kind of, it takes a lot of power and control to force it back down, sensei, Naruto admitted as his hair fizzled a bit in his hands. The man studied the hair for a moment before blinking in surprise. He grabbed a strand, making the boy pause in surprise, and his single eye widened as he felt the energy pulse in the capture lock. You use your hair braid as a conduit of power and to keep it locked away, he said, half accusingly and half in amazement. Naruto stared at him before shaking his head, making the former Anbu pause and say in confusion, don't you? The boy sighed and smoothed the frazzled strands carefully. Kind of, Naruto replied, my hair's reaction to the energy is a result of my training, since I am currently studying under the woman known formerly as Jorōgumo. Kakashi blinked at the familiar title, in the art of assassination, infiltration, stealth, traps, and battle. One day, when my hair is not only long enough, I'll be able to incorporate it into my fights and my equipment. I don't store my power in my hair to suppress it, but to strengthen the strands for their future use. The intricate braids I do help the power move through a conduit in a particular fashion, however at my stage the hair glows rather randomly and is quite distinctive in color and its actions. I won't have it to a proper level to keep the power hidden for another 6 months, perhaps a year latest. Aburame sensei says that's when I'll start learning the first of her hidden spider killing techniques. Which is why you usually keep it covered, Kakashi reasoned with a slow nod, the mask. The byproduct of having chakra-enhanced senses, Naruto said, I need to be able to distinguish different poisons, medicines, and antidotes as well as people, without relying on my eyes, which means I have a heightened sense of smell. I can do it to a lesser extent with my taste and hearing, however, I'm still in training for that since it isn't as instinctive for me for some reason. I'm still trying to get my sense of smell in control too, since it switches on at the slightest jolt. Kakashi nodded in understanding. He had powerful smelling abilities and used the mask for the purpose of hiding his identity and to keep smells at bay. It also hides distinctive facial markers. Naruto quietly stated as he tugged down the mask revealing his whiskers with a sigh. Well, it helps build up my stamina, although mine is already quite impressive. It doubles not only as a training tool, but a filter and a way of keeping my identity hidden. His sensei nodded. Are you going to redo the braids? Kakashi asked as the boy slowly ran his fingers through the lower ends of the strands and formed his hair into a loose braid, tying off the end with the ribbon he'd dug out earlier. He earned a headshake as his answer. My hairpin's true purpose has been lost, Naruto admitted. They are designed to absorb some of the residue chakra, however, at the level I was releasing it at they were overpowered and are now warped. I would have to return to my place of residence to get more, and considering we are only practicing today, there is no reason for me to go through such efforts. I'll leave it down. The man glanced at him with a raised eyebrow. It takes an hour and a half to get them right, sensei. I have no wish to do it for a second time in a period of 24 hours. The hair need to rest anyway since they've been overtaxed in a matter of moments. Fine, Kakashi said, we'll move on to other things. While your teammates work on their chakra control, tell me about the ninjutsu you can do. Naruto sighed but moved into a comfortable seiza position, the braid flopping back over his shoulder and his mask repositioned. Aburame sensei has most recently taught me. Sakura was on cloud 9, she was paired with the love of her life, and Ino Pig was left in the dust. Oh. All the time they would spend together would have to mean something. Thank Kami, she'd passed her new sensei's test, and her other genin partner was so mild and meek-mannered. It was like she was alone with Sasuke-kun. Skipping into the training area, she positively brightened as she caught sight of her crush. Hiding behind a bush real quick, she did a quick check on her makeup and looks before coming out and sauntering over to the boy as he leaned against the tree looking mysterious. In all actuality she looked like an insane patient, the hip movements ugly due to her mostly prepubescent body. The blue-black-haired boy, who was ignoring her, was starting to wish they'd failed the exam and forced back for another year so he could, hopefully, end up on another team. He scowled a bit and glanced around for his sensei and other teammate. They were both better than the crazy pink-haired girl who was one of the worst stalkers that he had. Seriously, he thought grumpily, anyone would have been better than her, anyone, except maybe Yamanaka. He grimaced mentally and nearly sighed in relief when he noticed Hinata coming towards them. She shyly waved her hand at the two which he returned while ignoring Sakura's bad attempts at cajoling him into talking. Hello, Uchiha-kun, Haruno-san, Hinata said politely, her stutter forced down mostly. Sasuke gave her a curt nod and returned to staring at the gate waiting for their sensei that appeared moments later via Shushin. Hello sensei, Hinata immediately greeted earning a gentle smile. The greeting echoed by Sakura moments later, Sasuke giving a brief head nod when she appeared on time. Hello, Genin, Kurenai said with a smile, congratulations once more on passing the academy and my personal test. Since we're now a group, I thought we'd tell each other a little about ourselves before I see where exactly you are in your capabilities and what specialties you may have. It'll give me a better idea of what kind of squad we'll shape out to be. The kind of squad, sensei? Sakura asked in surprise, her thoughts having never considered it. She's always seen ninja, as well, ninja, these awesome characters that did amazing things and were heroes. All three of her teammates turned to stare at her for a moment, all of them a bit surprised. I didn't think we'd make a squad, aren't we just going to learn from you until we make Chunin? Kurenai started before catching herself mid-reprimand. Letting out a long breath she motioned them over to a bench. Hinata took the center position at her gesture, glancing nervously at the angry Pinkat who glowered at her for taking the seat next to the last Uchiha. The boy looked relieved just the slightest bit and glanced at her silently in thanks. Kurenai twitched as the girl opened her mouth to protest. She cut it off before Sakura could annoy her further. Hinata-chan, would you care to explain? The Jounin Kunoichi said darkly, earning a surprised look from Sakura who flinched when she caught her sensei's angry gaze. The Hyuga nodded, taking a deep breath in. There are many purposes shinobi serve, however it is not possible for them to serve every single one. She took another breath and forced a stutter away fully. This is what leads to the different divisions and core. The most famous ones are seduction, anbu, and the torture and intelligence division, also known as T&I. The manner in which ninja are divided is through their different skill sets and abilities they hold or have. For those who specialize in chakra control, they may turn to the medical core or even infiltration if they're experienced and a delicate touch with genjutsu. Those who are stronger at taijutsu, ninjutsu, and tracking often work as patrols. Those ninja who belong to certain clans often have an ability that is strong in a specific job, since they are actually bred and trained for this. Kurenai nodded proudly and Sasuke stared at the girl like he'd never seen her before. Sakura just pouted. Does that mean one day I'll be separated from Sasuke-kun? She whined and her other teammates turned and stared at her incredulously. Kurenai nearly gave in and smacked her in the head like she did to Anko when she was acting up, but instead growled. The pink-haired civilian-born girl flinched again. Sasuke-san, do you have an example of this you can share? She said dryly, turning to her lone male student. He nodded stiffly. The Hyugas are well known to be excellent trackers or medical nins because of their taijutsu. Their fine control is taught from childhood and is almost instinctual, allowing for work in many of the finer and less conspicuously powered arts. The uchihas, he paused here and swallowed around his closing throat, one served as the police nin because of Sharingan. We were able to dissect crime scenes, and opponents' moves were almost instantly learned since our taijutsu was able to see the undetectable in seconds. We are also known genjutsu specialists not only for being able to see through them, but to be able to inflict them due to our close studies of the different elements connected to those arts. The woman nodded in agreement. Good, the trio ignored Sakura's high-pitched squeal in support of the boy and pushed on. I'm glad you and Hinata took your lessons so seriously, Sasuke-kun. She looked narrowly at the civilian who froze under her gaze once more. It's nice that someone takes this job with the seriousness that it requires. The girl opened her mouth as if to contest this, but shut it sharply when the glare intensified. Kurenai was starting to regret choosing Haruno, even if the girl had a good grounding with book knowledge and a fine level of control on her small pools of chakra. Listen up, she said sharply, my job as your Jounin sensei is not to teach you fancy jutsu or sparring techniques. My job is to make sure you become the best shinobi you can be. If I find you are dragging us down in any manner, this was said while staring at Sakura particularly sharply, I will recommend your immediate removal and reassignment. As of yesterday you passed my test by proving you could work as a team, something that is highly valued by our village. However, now you have to prove yourselves as more than just a civilian in a headband. I chose you three for a reason due to my own abilities and hope to pass on skills that would make you part of the elite. However, you will only go as far as you are willing to be capable of. The trio stared at her and she knew only one wasn't getting it. Meeting the determined gazes of her two dark-haired students, Kurenai wondered if she'd have to get her best friend Anko in on the training with Sakura. The pincat was going to piss her off no doubt, and she didn't have the patience to break a fangirl out of their irritating and obsessive tendencies. Taking a deep breath she said, now, tell me just what kind of shinobi you think you are, and I'm going to do my best to make you as capable as you plan to be. Hinata went through the spar nervously, although Sasuke-kun, as he told her to call him, was surprisingly patient, matching her move for move as she traveled through her style. Kurenai-sensei was currently berating Haruno-san, a surprisingly bright academy student but a bit of dumb genin, over her ideology after realizing just why she was a kunoichi. While it was nice that the other girl was fighting for someone else's recognition, Haruno's case, in her teammates' opinion, was straight out wrong. However, Hinata and Sasuke were sparring and she moved away from this as she instinctively moved through the different katas and positions of her family's special taijutsu. Seeing an opening, Hinata moved in and struck, winding her teammate as the open palm strike punched into his stomach. Stepping back startled, she immediately stammered out an apology. She rarely hit anyone while fighting at the compound, and her hitting the Rookie of the Year was nothing if unexpected and unbelievable to the shy girl whose only friends were two of the quietest, gentlest people. Oh no, she thought at the currently absent Shino and Naruto, he's going to hate me, what do I do? The boy, however, merely straightened and looked her over in approval. It is fine, Sasuke said through gritted teeth, studying his opponent. He hadn't thought much of this girl back during their school years, but she was surprisingly capable. The girl had been much like the two shadows, Uzumaki and Aburame, silent and awkward, and spent time with them whenever she seemed to work up the nerve or the class required groups of three. However, she'd proven to be one of the best, though her confidence was a bit weak, especially if he remembered her placement among the top 3 kunoichi who graduated. He had a feeling that if the girl was a bit fiercer, she would have beaten out Sakura and Ino and been the unrivaled best. You're a strong opponent, he admitted a bit jealously, but I will be stronger. He swore. Their teacher had stared at him when he admitted his dream before asking, "And after you accomplish that?" Which had thrown him for a loop and forced him to actually consider it. She'd merely sighed and shook her head, clasping his shoulder and telling him to think beyond that and consider why else he wanted to be strong. He further considered it as he took the shy girl in. Their fight continued for several more minutes before coming to a pause. Yuga Hinata was weak in many ways, but she was secretly determined and, most of all, kind. Her actions reminded him a bit of his mother, sweet and soft, but with a steel-like spine that came out at the oddest of times. Well, he'd loved his father, he'd adored his mother. "Why do you fight so hard?" he asked her as they stopped to catch their breath and check over their wounds. Nothing was serious and, with a little ointment, there would be little pain the next day. Hinata, startled by the question, stared at him for a moment, her soft, shy face paling for a split second before the color returned in a rush and her face firmed in determination. The trembling lips and awkward glances leaving, and a strong, growing Kunoichi stared back at him. "I want to change my clan," she said with a whispery voice that denoted no nonsense. Sasuke blinked. "Change your clan?" he asked as she turned to look off for a bit. "Do you know anything about the Hyugas?" she asked, her fingers clenching and twisting and poking together before her waist in obvious agitation. No, he'd never thought past his own except about whom he could fight to get stronger, not really. The Hyugas are divided into two, the branch family, she said, and the main family. She turned to look at him again. The branch family despises the main, and rightly so. We were absolutely horrible to them. Sasuke blinked. "Then can't you be nice?" he asked and winced at the naivety in the question. Sadness descended over her features and she sighed. Every non-main branch member of the family is branded by a seal that is controlled by the main family, especially the head. She said with surprisingly flatness and anger, "It marks them as slaves and whipping boys to the main, it hurts them on command. I hate it." Sasuke stared at her, and neither noticed the other two watching them from a bit away. Sakura's face a mix of horror and embarrassment as she took in her own teammate's goal, and immediately hers seemed so selfish compared to Hinata's. A girl who was hoping to change something everyone seemed to stand for. "I'm weak though," Hinata admitted, "and I can't stop it." "Do you have a seal?" Sasuke asked, feeling a strong amount of anger on the timid girl's part. Hinata shook her head. "I'm the oldest daughter of the main house," she stated, "and the possible heir." Sasuke stared at her uncomprehending. "But there's no guarantee I'll be considered the heir after my sister graduates." The implications became clear. "I won't let you get branded," Sasuke said, his mouth moving without his command, the words hissed angrily and with clear determination. "Resolved." She glanced at him pityingly. I highly doubt you'll get a CH choice in it." Sasuke escorted Hinata home and glared fiercely at the guards when they reached the gates, almost blaming them for the slightly smaller genin's troubles. "I'll see you tomorrow for practice and missions, Hinata-chan, I'll be by to pick you up," he said gruffly as the girl bowed in goodbye to him, his gaze softening on her. She mumbled something similar and disappeared behind the gates, which immediately shut, sharply cutting her off from his gaze. With one last dark look at the guards he left, hands shoved deep within his pockets and his shoulders tense with distemper. Hinata-chan was nice. She was also screwed over by a sibling more talented than she. She was him in reverse, trapped by living demons in her waking hours, instead of being tormented by dead ancestors and family while asleep. Both of them had doubts about ever completing their dreams and were half doomed in a manner that was apparent and depressing. While he had one enemy, she had dozens. He punched a wall and cursed when pain shot up his arm, before ignoring it and stuffing the aching hand into his pocket. Glowering at the ground, he returned to the Uchiha compound, for once not haunted by his family's red eyes staring up and death all around him, but instead by a pale-faced, lavender-eyed girl who seemed more terrified going home than leaving it. Kiba's head went up when he heard the shuffle of feet on gravel. Straightening from his place on his bed, he scrambled to look out his open window and grinned widely as he saw his teammates make their way up the pathway with two older figures. Both wore modified outfits of their usual genin uniform, and Naruto's hair was down instead of in a braid, a dark cream band pushing most of his long hair back, leaving two long strands to frame his face. Their companions, obviously Shino's parents and Naruto's landlords, followed sedately behind them. Shino looked a lot like his dad, though his hair was a bit tamer. His mother reminded him of a deadlier Naruto, no doubt Naruto's teacher in shinobi arts. "Boy!" he shouted in greeting, attracting his partner's attention before clambering out of his window onto the house's patio roof before jumping off, Akamaru following him out. "Hey," he said when he landed before them and they met him after walking a bit more. "Hello, Kiba-san," Shino said in his usual stiff manner, "thank you for inviting us to your home," he bowed, and Naruto repeated the same message with an equally low bow. Yeah, welcome," he said awkwardly. Akamaru jumped onto his head before pushing off of his forehead and leaping into Naruto's arms with an excited bark. The blonde giggled and cuddled the dog closely. Akamaru, Kiba growled and earned a doggy laugh from his best friend, who then pointedly ignored him in favor of greeting his favorite blonde with continued enthusiasm. Kiba-san, Shino cut in, preventing another argument while hiding a smile as his best friend cuddled the canine. May I introduce you and your mother to my parents? Kiba flinched and glanced over his shoulder to see his mother standing behind him, hands on her hips with an irritated scowl on her face. Yes, Kiba, she drawled, have them introduce us inside the house, instead of out here, as is proper. Her son scratched his head in embarrassment and ushered them in, all four giving a polite bow, and thanks for the invitation to dinner, Tsume's gaze tracking them as they followed the two Inyazuka in. When they entered the guest room of the building, introductions were made all around and then repeated when Hana, the clan heir, joined them. So, Tsume said, as she sat at her place in the front, her gaze on Naruto as dinner got on its way, I heard you're a trap expert. She studied the Jinchuriki as it cuddled her own partner's, Kuramaru's, youngest pup, Akamaru in his lap. The dog was one of the best hounds ever birthed and she'd been proud when her son and the dog had immediately clicked. With how the puppy was behaving though, it seemed as though it found the human sacrifice just yes, Naruto answered, I am training to be an expert infiltration and trapping operative. Got any tracking skills? She asked, her head beat to the side, her appraisal of her son's teammate quickly turning towards a positive one. I can have some basic understanding since I've worked with Shino and assisted in his own training, Naruto said. I'm more of a support however, in that type of work. Training under me has made him more of a wait until the prey is caught in the web type, Saki said with a knife-like smile as she met the brazen woman's eyes, her own narrowing in warning. The blue eyes of Naruto also read with the knowledge he was being judged, however the dark gaze of the former shinobi known as Jorōgumo read deep disapproval and Tsume bit back a sigh, immediately abandoning the thread of conversation she'd been attempting to plot out. Subtlety had never been her strong suit after all. Ah, Tsume said, picking up the teapot, want some more tea? She asked, shoving the clay earthenware spout towards the boy. Blinking, he brushed a stray strand of gold hair out of his face and smiled politely. Thank you, he said with a slight bow, offering his empty cup to her. I am most appreciative. The rigid formality seemed to be a scold and she slightly adjusted her opinion again. The brat hadn't approved of how she acted either. Not that she could blame him. Damn it. Kiba watched the tension build between his mother and the two more feminine of their guests in confusion. His mother's offer of tea had been an obvious attempt at apology, and Naruto's stiff agreement was juxtaposition to his normally friendly if quiet and slightly distant demeanor. Sniffing, he tried to read the emotions via their scents and ended up having to hide a scowl. The strong scent of the garlic and ginger he'd eaten hid it too well, and he grumpily dug into another bite, accepting he wouldn't be able to understand that way. He glanced sneakily at his sister from the corner of his eye and took in her appraisal of his new friends and tried not grumble angrily. Don't they trust my own judgment and opinion? He thought, annoyed with them both. He could understand them being protective, but the Aburames and Naruto had been totally, absolutely polite throughout the whole night and his family was acting like a bunch of jerks. Thus, dinner ended on a tense note with his mother and his sister shooing him and his team off to play and leaving the adults behind to catch up and get to know one another. Kiba groused in frustration and led his two new pals up to his room. Glancing back at his mother and sister, he offered them a look of complete upset and felt a bone-deep satisfaction when they both flinched and looked a touch ashamed. Satisfied, the youngest of the Inyazuka main family led his friends upstairs. He wanted to ask Naruto's opinion on where to buy the best fuinjutsu stuff in the village. Aburame Saki had been retired since her first attempt at getting pregnant some 15 years ago. Now, a satisfied housewife and part-time instructor with two growing boys, she was pissed. Staring at the Inyazuka head silently, she wondered if the Sandeami would truly be upset if she donned her old hit I-8 and declared a duel between her and the slightly more voluptuous woman. What, she said darkly, exactly was that? The two other women looked slightly embarrassed and shared a look before Tsume answered. I was worried about the Jinchuriki, she admitted. Kiba is quite fond of him and wanted to know how dangerous he was to himself and others. So you made a folly of inviting a fellow clan head to dinner and embarrassed your son by unsubtly poking and prodding at a newly made comrade's abilities, Saki hissed. Her hair crackled a bit as she almost instinctively reached for her jutsu. Tsume hastily shook her head, holding her hands in a silent plea for time and patience. I like the kid so far, Tsume said, but I don't get whatever happened with him. You ain't active like Hana and me are, we hear things about the trouble the Jinchuriki and Suna gives his folks. I ain't saying anything against Uzumaki-kun, she said quickly, the rising ire turning to killing intent. She darted a look at Shibi who sat by and refused to meet her ire give aid, his wife handling things quite well in his opinion. I just wanna see where the boy stands. He doesn't even know about it. Saki almost shouted, her hands going up in exasperation. He's a shy child who's been bullied, taunted and tormented for years. He doesn't deserve your silent condemnation and fear. Do you know they threw him out of the orphanage at the age of 6? He's been renting a guest house on our compound since then. That mask he wears. He's glad to be able to hide his features. That bandana. I'm amazed he gave it to Akamaru. He needs it to hide who he is. Yet he gave it away. He's proud of his abilities, is probably the strongest fighter in the whole year group of his. But he will never be acknowledged for it. Not until he dies in his efforts probably. She continued angrily. He and Shino could be better than that uchiha if they wanted, in fact, they are better. Both of them have been training and excelling. I would put them in the Chunin exams right this second and they'd pass. With Naruto's chakra reserves and control he could become anything he wants. He used to say he wanted to be Hokage, to be acknowledged. He doesn't anymore. He stopped smiling for a month once when he said that to a stranger and they tried to choke the demon brat for, and I quote, talking to their betters and trying to rise above their station in life. He nearly got beaten to death when he was 8 for trying to go to that blasted festival to celebrate his birthday outside for once. She broke her random words spilling out. He turns another year older and he doesn't get to have his parents sweep him into their arms and wish him a happy birthday. He's too busy trying to avoid a damn mob of people who hate him for saving them, for being burdened. Saki said almost brokenly. He'd take a blade to the heart for anyone and people only see that thing. People were never said to be universally intelligent or rational, Saki, Shibi said tiredly. Tsume hunched over a bit embarrassment. Hana didn't meet anyone's eyes, ashamed of herself for allowing rumors from civilians color her own opinions of a fellow shinobi. I am sorry, Tsume said, I am sure he's a great boy, it's just the thing in him is dangerous, the most dangerous of the 9. If the container of the first Bijuu is having so much trouble I worry about what will happen if anything ever damages his own seal. From my intelligence, the Suna never used a proper seal on their container, Shibi said stiffly as his wife turned away to compose herself. Further intelligence says the boy is heavily targeted by the Kazekage and attacked regularly by assassins. While Naruto has not had trained assassins after him until the age of 8 he would regularly be beaten, starved and mistreated by the general populace. Tsume stared at him in shock. Aburame's always served in the outposts, Shibi said, our insects are perfect for infiltration and notification, just as we are. We have spies throughout the entirety of Hai no Kuni. As head, I hear things before the Sandaime in some ways. Information brokers, Tsume said as she studied the aloof clan head. The Aburame had never fully been integrated into the village hidden in the leaves, no matter how loyal they were. It made her wonder what else she'd missed about this secretive intelligent clan. Espionage nin, Saki corrected turning back. The best, she smiled warmly at her husband who tilted his head in thanks at her compliment. Of course, that means they attract the best assassins, she said sweetly. Is that what you're teaching him? Hana asked, speaking for the first time that night. I'm teaching him how to be the best shinobi he can be. Saki stated proudly. He's the heir to the Jorōgumo, a lock of her hair freed itself and formed into a sharp point, he will be the best Jorōgumo, and I have no doubt about it. He has a will of fire that is unsurpassed. The end. So how was this part? I hope you like it. And if you like it share this part with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay it's time for me to go. Bye bye.